Hello everyone, welcome to the INS lecture series. This is lecture number 13. In this particular session, we will continue with the key management which we did in the previous session. So here, the difference is in this session we will study symmetric key distribution using asymmetric encryption technique. We'll see how we can do the key distribution using asymmetric encryption. In the previous case, we saw how we can do it by using a KDC. And here using the asymmetric encryption we will do that. So these are some of the subtopics we will see: the simple secret key distribution, then man-in-middle attack which can be done on this simple secret key distribution, then secret key distribution with confidentiality as well as authentication, and then finally the hybrid model. So let us start with the symmetric key distribution using asymmetric encryption. Now asymmetric crypto systems, so they are not very efficient, as we say. Efficient in the sense they are slow as compared to symmetric crypto systems. So it takes some time to encrypt and decrypt the data. So this is not suitable for big chunks of data directly. So asymmetric crypto systems, they are useful for small data chunks, less data. So what we can do is they can be used for encrypting the secret keys, because keys, they are generally of not very large size. They may be around maybe we can say 128 bits or around. So that 128 bits data, it can be used, we can encrypt that particular key using this asymmetric key crypto systems. So there are many ways to share the secret symmetric key using the asymmetric encryption. The most simplest way is the simple secret key distribution. So let us see that. So how does it work? Now let us assume we have Alice and Bob. They want to share a symmetric key, okay, a session key we can say. So how does it occurs? So what Alice does, Alice creates a pair of public and private key. So this KPU and KPR. So Alice uses a particular asymmetric key generation algorithm, and she generates these two keys, the public and the private key. But public key she shares with everyone, okay, and the private key she does not share with anybody. So in the first step, what does Alice do is Alice creates a pair of public and private key and shares her public key and her identifier with Bob. So she need to identify that she is Alice, and she wants a secret key, okay, or a session key. After receiving the request from Alice, what Bob does, so in step 2, Bob creates a secret key KS, encrypts the key with Alice's public key and sends it to Alice. What does Alice do? Alice decrypts the message from Bob using a private key. Now because the key which was generated by Bob in step 2, it was encrypted using Alice's public key, so it can only be decrypted by Alice's private key. So Alice has that key, so Alice decrypts, she gets the private, she gets the secret key. Now in step 4, the key which were generated by Alice, as we can see in the first step, public and private key pair, they are discarded, and Bob also discards Alice's public key. So this is a very simple protocol and a very effective protocol, because no key exists before the start of the communication as well as the after the communication. So the keys are discarded, only what we have is the secret key, there is a session key. But this particular protocol, it can suffer from a man-in-middle attack. Now what is this, how it happens in this case? So in step 1, as previously we know, Alice creates a pair of public and private key, KPR and KPU and KPR, shares her public key with Bob, okay. She shares her public key and the identifier with Bob. Now in step 2, what we see is there is an attacker, Eve, okay. So this attacker Eve, she blocks the communication between Alice and Bob. She intercepts the message and creates her own pair of public and private key, that is K-PU and K-PR, and she shares this public key, this public key with Bob, as well as the identifier, Alice's identifier with Bob, okay. So Bob thinks that this K-PU was sent by Alice. Now in step 3, Bob assumes that the message is from Alice, so he creates a secret key, encrypts it using K-PU, which was received from Eve, and sends it to Alice. But because Eve has intercepted them, blocked the communication, so Eve gets that particular message. Eve decrypts the message from Bob using her private key K-PR. She gets the secret key. Now in the next step, what she does, Eve encrypts the same secret key KS which she received from Bob using Alice's public key, which she had received from Alice, this one. Okay, and she sends it to Alice. Alice assumes that the message has come from Bob. Alice decrypts the message. She gets the secret key KS. So what we see is that Alice, Bob and Eve, they all possess this secret key, okay, the session key. So this is the drawback. Now next what we do is, because in the previous case the drawback was there was no authentication mechanism, so here we have confidentiality as well as authentication mechanism. We will introduce this, how we can actually authenticate. So Bob must know that the private key was indeed sent by Alice and nobody else. Okay, so in step 1, what happens, Alice creates a public and private keys, and Bob also create his own public and private keys. So this KPR and KPU, so KPU is the public key of Alice and KPR is the private key of Alice. Similarly, K-PU and K-PR, they are the private and public keys of Bob. So what happens is Alice and Bob, they share their public keys with everyone, but they do not share their private keys. Next, what happens, Alice creates a message containing her identity, a nonce, that is a N1, okay, which can be used so that there is no replay attack. So this nonce also identifies, uniquely identifies this particular transaction, and it encrypts it using Bob's public key and sends it to Bob. Okay, so Alice creates a message which contains her identity and the nonce N1, and these two things she encrypts using Bob's public key and sends it to Bob. Now in step 2, Bob decrypts the message using his private key, because this was encrypted using Bob's public key, so it will be decrypted by using Bob's private key only. So after decrypting, he gets two things. Okay, one is the N1 and other is the Alice's identity. So what does Bob do in this step? Bob creates a message containing nonce N2 and nonce N1. Okay, because this was received from us, he has to send that back, and encrypts the message, the entire message, using Alice's public key. Okay, so in step 2 and step 3, Bob he creates a message which contains nonce N2, nonce N1, and encrypts the entire message using Alice's public key. Okay, now this N1, it assures Bob's authentication, that the message has been received by Bob properly. Then step 4, Alice returns N2 back to Bob, okay, because that N2 was sent by Bob to Alice by encrypting using Alice's public key. Now when Alice receives this message, she actually decrypts using her private key, and she gets N2 and she returns this back to Bob. Thereby she can authenticate. So up to step 4, all the authentication process were complete. Then in step 5, Alice creates a secret key, that is the session key KS. She encrypts it using her private key, and then encrypts it again using Bob's public key, and then sends it to Bob. So here double encryption is done. Okay, the first encryption is done using Alice's private key, and the second, the entire message is encrypted by using Bob's public key, and she sends it to Bob. What Bob will do, Bob will first of all decrypt the message using his private key, and then decrypts, which is unsigning, using Alice's public key. So this is how we can achieve both confidentiality as well as authentication can be done using the exchange of the secret key. We can also use a hybrid model. Now in a hybrid model, again, as we saw in the previous session, we have a KDC. So a KDC, it can share a secret master key with each user. The KDC then sends out session keys encrypted with this master key. Then public key encryption is used to send the master keys. So master keys can be sent using the public key of those identities, of those entities. Now regarding the performance, for certain tasks like transactions, keys need to be changed a lot. So using this public key encryption for all these changes can slow down things, because here as we can see, public and private, this encryption public private, then again using that for encryption, it takes time, so it will actually affect the performance. Compatibility is this mixed approach. It fits well with existing KD systems. So whatever KD systems we have, this approach fits well. Okay, so there is no big disruption. We don't need to change the system drastically. So just few changes we can use this system. So by just adding a public layer, we already have a symmetric key layer, so we just add a public layer. Distributing master keys becomes secure and efficient. So this is one of the hybrid approach in which we combine symmetric as well as asymmetric approach. So that's all for this particular session. Thanks for watching.